Hi class, this is Professor Wilcox and I'm here with Professor McClellan and with Professor Levesque, and we'll be going through Unit 2. Most importantly, we'll be focusing on Notation Convention Homework 13 and 14, as those seem to be the ones giving people the most trouble. That being said, as a reminder, you can always spend some time asking questions in the Piazza forum. So the more that we can get from you, the more we can answer your specific questions. So if you have a question about a specific problem on the homework that's giving you trouble, take a screen capture, stick it in the forum. If you have a specific issue that you're having, take a screen capture, stick it in the forum. Give us stuff to work with and we'll be the most helpful in this regard. I might periodically eat some lunch. But don't be offended by that. You may periodically hear a baby in the background, but that's on Professor McClellan. Let's go ahead and get started. Does anybody want to get us underway, or anybody else have general thoughts about Unit 2 they want to share?
I have a general thought just about the course that never can be repeated often enough, that there is a section in the course home called Vital Grade Info. And we went through the dictionary carefully searching for the right word, and we chose vital because it truly is vital that you read this section, because you may have a lower grade than you think. And so if you can please check that section, watch the video, and as you go through the course, just make sure you're looking at your actual grade, not what the grade book seems to say. And we wish we could fix this, but it's built into eCollege, so we can't. So I always like to just remind people about that. But that's not about Unit 2 specifically. I can share my screen and we can start to dig into some stuff if that would be useful.
Do you want to do exercise 13?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll get exercise 14 ready.
Okay, perfect. So let me see. Can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, so this is Unit 2, and we are in notational conventions. And yeah, this is where things get a little tricky, just especially when it comes to doing the homework, because we're asking for a fairly subtle thing. What did I just happened? Okay, good. So it helps to watch the video, of course, but the way that this goes, this is a really good test of your knowledge. Like if you can do this, then you are really on top of how rhythm works. And if you're struggling with it, that means you're almost there, and you just need to push yourself a little further to get all the way there to really be a master of this topic. But Dr. Wilcox, long ago when we built the course, very cleverly built this tool that lets you manipulate the actual notation and then fill in the blanks. So basically, you're just asked to fill in the duration that is missing from the measure. It's sort of an addition problem. Like here's, each measure has a given amount of value overall that just belongs in a 6/8 measure, and then you're given a certain value that's less than that total value, and you have to fill in the remainder. So if you're good at math, you should be able to do this. I'm not good at math, and I can still do it, but that's only because I spent many years studying this. So let's do the first one. And again, think of it as a math problem, and I'm going to think of it in eighth notes. The total number of eighth notes, there are 6 of them, even though we know that actually 6/8 is 2 beats of 2 dotted quarters when you talk about the metric structure. But there are 6 eighth note values. So you just sort of have to see how many you have and then fill in the remainder. So a dotted quarter, well, a quarter is 2 eighth notes. The dot adds half of the quarter, which is another eighth note value. And then each of the 16ths is a half an eighth note, so 4 of them is 2. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of 6, we just need 1 more. So then we go down and we drag the eighth note rest. It's eighth, I shouldn't say eighth note, eighth rest into the slot. I'm going to do the next one similarly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 16th notes is 2 1/2 eighth notes, and then we have 1, 2, 3 eighth notes. So that's 7 1/2 eighth notes. We need half of an eighth note remainder, so we drag in the value that equals half an eighth note. And I won't do the rest of it, but once you have your items in there, you type in the letters that you were given, D, B, and so on. So hope that helps. And now over to Dr. Levesque.
Okay, so we had a bunch of questions on the forum about this exercise. Let me do my screen share here. You guys can see my screen now. So this is Unit 2 Rhythm Homework 14. And as Dr. McClellan mentioned, this is another math problem, but there is an additional step you have to do before. And this is what was throwing some people on the forum. The first thing you need to understand is whether the meter is simple or compound. And if you have a meter like 6/8, that is a compound meter, as opposed to a meter like 3/4, which is a simple meter. From there, you have to correctly identify how many beats are in a measure and how those beats are grouped. And this is what was really throwing people on the forums. So let me show you a couple of answers that are correct. So we have 6/8. And this is a compound meter. In this compound meter, there are 2 beats per measure. In each measure, 3 eighth notes in it. So if you look at this first measure, we have a problem where we have an eighth note and a quarter note, followed by 3 eighth notes. So that is the complete measure. What we're doing, which is very understandable, was this. And that would be a perfectly correct answer if this were 3/4, but in 6/8 it is not. And the reason it's not is because if you have 2 beats per measure and each beat is an eighth note, and each beat is a dotted quarter note, then everything within that second dotted quarter note, which begins here, beam together. So the correct answer would actually be this. And you can clearly see, if I draw a little imaginary line here, how on the left side we have the equivalent of a dotted quarter, an eighth and a quarter, and on the right side we have the equivalent of a dotted quarter, 3 eighth notes all beamed together. And by shooting right down the middle there and splitting that measure in half, really identify what needs to be beamed on each side. Now if I go down to this 3/4 example, something that has the same number of eighth notes per measure, both 3/4 and 6/8 have 6 eighth notes in per measure, but the grouping is going to be different. Now we have to have 3 groupings of 2 eighth notes instead of 2 groupings of 3. So again, let me show you an incorrect answer first. 8. Then this answer would be absolutely correct, because then you could see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 into 2 groups of 2. But because it is 3/4, we need to respect and recognize notes. So in this case, we would have group of 2, instead of a group of 3 and a group of 1. So the steps for this problem: number 1, recognizing whether it's simple or compound time. Number 2, identifying where the beats are drawn and where the beat divisions are. And then number 3, beaming the notes together underneath those beats so that you can clearly see the rhythmic structure and the beat pattern. So I think that's it for that one, unless someone wants to do another.
No, I think you were very thorough on that. But do you think, since we'll probably have more people watch after than are currently watching now, maybe we should take a minute just to review the meters, the difference between simple and compound. I mean, I know you just discussed that in relationship to the assignment, but maybe directly, without any other materials being dealt with, just directly give some people some advice on how to look at and interpret just a meter on the page. Looks like Professor McClellan's digging something up there. Maybe I'll turn it over to him.
I was just looking at the lesson to find the place where it's most succinctly and clearly stated. just as a general note, we notice some students don't spend as much time in the lessons as they could, and in some cases, you know, if you are an expert, you've done this a lot before, maybe you can skip through some lessons. But no matter how much experience you have, there's going to be stuff in here that you don't know, and we still recommend strongly that you look through these. And then, especially if you're just not clear on anything, please take time to look through these lessons, because we've very carefully laid everything out. And so I'm trying to find, oh, you know what, this isn't the right lesson. So I want to talk about the difference between simple and compound. And that was a more general discussion of meter.
Why don't you look at lesson 6?
Yes, I think that's what I just, yeah. So this is, the thing is that meter is very simple in a sense, and time signatures are not. And I think this is a good illustration of that. If you look at this little matrix here, there are really only a few meters, but there's each metric structure has multiple time signatures that fit that meter, and that can be quite confusing. So for example, 2/8, 2/4, and 2/2 are actually all the same metric structure. In other words, there's 2 beats in the measure, and each beat divides equally into 2 parts. And that's just a single metric structure. You can describe it in a simple sentence: 2 beats, each beat divides in half. And yet there's 3 different time signatures that all express that exact same thing. And one of the mysteries of music theory is, why the heck are there 3 different ways of saying the same thing? I don't know exactly a perfect answer for that, but it's sort of, music theory and music notation has evolved over many centuries, and it's evolved to serve practical needs, and people have found different uses for these and different ways of expressing themselves, even though on a very technical level they're the same. So if you understand the structure, the point of all this is to say that if you understand the structure, you can plug in the different time signatures and know what you're dealing with. So these charts are very helpful, just to see that in a simple meter there are basically 3 options: 2 beats, 3 beats, or 4 beats per measure, and they all divide in half, as opposed to compound meter, where the beat divides in 3. And so it's important to distinguish between the number of beats in the measure versus what happens inside each beat. And the distinction between duple and compound only has to do with what happens inside of each beat. And so compound time signatures are the most confusing, because instead of having a single beat as the numeral on the bottom of the time signature, now that numeral is 3 different, is 3 times I always get muddled up trying to explain this, even though I've done this for many years. For whatever reason, this is just one of those strange things about music theory. For whatever reason, the bottom number of the time signature in compound meter does not equal 1 beat. That's the thing you have to remember. It equals it equals the beat division. And so if you see, for example, 9/16, you have to divide 9 in 3 to get the number of beats. And so I won't try to explain this at length right now. I just encourage you to study this carefully and remember that it's it truly is a little weird. And if it seems weird to you, that's okay. Just spend time with it until it starts to make sense. And the fundamental thing that helps me is to know that if I see a lot of dotted note values, I'm probably in a compound time signature. That's a sort of a general tip that can help you identify it.
I must chime in here to say that I also agree that it's always a little difficult to explain the difference between these time signatures. And as I remember, Professor Levesque actually last time had a really interesting way of explaining this, or a way that really kind of made sense. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but what I was about to do before I cut Professor Levesque off was to ask Professor Levesque if he had any clever way of doing this.
Now I can't remember exactly how I did it last time. I was going to follow up on something that Dr. McClellan mentioned about the dots, and you know, this issue of the top number being the beat like it is in simple time. And my theory has always been that the reason why compound meter gets so difficult and why we can't say, for instance, you know, 6 over a dotted, you know, or 2 over a dotted chord note is just that we don't have numbers associated with dotted notes. And so, you know, we can say 4/4, and that means 4 chord notes in a measure, but it's very difficult for us to say 4, you know, 4 dotted quarter notes in a measure because we don't have a single number associated with dotted quarter notes. But there are some simple sort of memorization things you could do. Like any meter that has 6, 9, or 12 on the top is a compound meter. Anything with 2, 3, or 4 on the top is a simple meter. That's one that some people will fall back on. So if you see 6, 9, or 12, because those are numbers that are multiples of 3, you can count on that involving groupings of 3. And anything with 2, 3, or 4 is going to be that simple meter.
And that's a great general point that I know that when I was learning theory, and I think this is true for a lot of people, there's a certain amount of sheer memorization that you need to do, and using sort of memory tricks is super useful, and you should not like think that's cheating or cutting corners or anything. That's a vital part of learning all of this. So if you just remember what Dr. Levesque just said, like if you see 3, 6, 9, or 12 on the top of a time signature, even if you don't understand why, you don't remember the details, like just remember that's a sign that it's probably a compound time signature. That can help you a lot. Just those little tricks go a long way. So yeah, this is an example of sort of a good little pop quiz because we didn't put in the time signature. If you were looking at this example, what is the time signature? Well, one way to do it is to count the number of eighth notes in the bar. And you could say, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 8. And that would be accurate. But the real point is that that's a compound time signature as shown in this diagram, because in the bottom part you see a note for each beat. And the notes have dots because they are each made up of 3 divisions, beat divisions, which then you see in the top part. So this famous piece by Bach is a sort of a textbook example of compound meter, almost like mapped out in the notes. The structure of it is mapped out in the notes. So that kind of thing can be helpful as well.
And something you can see in that example, which you want to start keeping an eye out for, is the fact that notes are beamed together by beats. And so something that I could immediately see by looking at the second beat, or the second measure of this example, is the fact that this is a triple time. And I know it's a triple time in that there are 3 beats per measure because I can clearly see 3 groupings of eighth notes. And I got that just by looking at the beams. So always help you. But in this case, it's very useful to see that. And this is something that will come back and be very helpful when you're working on those beaming exercises. Remember that every beam or every beat should be a self-contained beam.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that anybody wants to cover before we head off? We don't seem to be getting any. Oh, wait, I think there might be a question here. Ask us any questions. We love questions. That's from Professor McClellan. I think we've marked that as resolved.
Well, not really, because we haven't gotten any questions, but
Yeah, it's true. But we could very well get questions if you're watching this later and want to leave us a question in the forum. We'll be happy to come back and answer those. Or if there's something we didn't cover that you wish we did, we'll also be happy to answer those. But since we are questionless, set adrift by the snow, we'll be calling it a day now. Unless anybody has anything else they want to mention.
Just want to reiterate that when you post to the forum, screenshots are a huge help.
Yeah.
If you can take a picture.
Numbers are not helpful because you may have question numbers are often randomized for different students. So your number 2 may be different from somebody else.
Yep. So please take a screenshot.
Absolutely.
Okay, signing off, it's Professor Wilcox.
Professor McClellan.
Professor Lebec.
All right, goodbye, all.